We are at rationality, and rationality is something we've been discussing since the first class again, because it's again core to economics, the assumptions of economics, and this is what we're questioning throughout. And decision making, when again we're making decisions, right? You're supposed to make rational decisions. So it's very important to continuously talk about rationality, our understanding of rationality, let's say 100 years back or 50 years back, to what it is now and how these theories have developed, right? So let's talk about what is rationality. Okay, economic theory, and this might be a bit of repetition, but I want to bring back these foundations for everyone so that it's easier for us to transcend and sort of compare and contrast how behavioral economics is different from classical economics, and how the way I see it, behavioral economics sort of plugs the leaks, or anywhere where you see that classical economics doesn't really exhibit the characteristics of reality and how actual, the term is the difference between homo economics and homo sapiens, and this is something that's mentioned in Richard Thaler's book. Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein, they have this book named Nudge, and this is one of the main literatures in behavioral economics. And Richard Thaler also got a Nobel Prize in 2003 for his contributions to behavioral economics. So this is the distinction they make: Homo economicus versus Homo sapiens. That is, that classical economics assumes that you are an economic agent completely. You make rational decisions, you have complete information, okay, and you have access and mental capacity to carry out calculations before you take any decision. And what Richard Thaler and behavioral economists argue now is that I don't think so. That we don't have complete information all the time. We don't have access to perfect information all the time. And we certainly don't do calculations when we're taking decisions in our real lives. And that is the distinction that we'll build upon. And we'll see what are different things that that encompass in the definition for Homo sapiens. Okay, so what is rationality? When you make a choice, you will choose the thing that you like best. And this correlates with this idea that the decisions that you're making are meant to maximize the utility that you're gaining from it, right? Okay, so in according to economists, as long as you're doing something that you want to do, i.e., that is, it maximizes your utility, you're acting rationally. Okay, now I've only, so these are the rationality assumptions, right? And I've literally repeated them in every class because it's very important, and it helps you contrast how things are developing, but it also forces you to question those rationality assumptions. Okay, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. So an example of the rationality assumption would be burning money. Okay, that should be considered irrational, right? I mean, why would you want to burn money? You can like buy things from it. And yet economists would have iffy stance on it. They'll say, they won't be so quick to judge. They'll say actually money is just people. Like in the modern monetary system, the face value of money is actually nothing because it's paper, right? It is the fact that it works in a social contract and acts as a legal tender, which is why money has value, and which is why you can use money as a medium of exchange, and it's accepted as a medium of exchange because it's provided by the government, right? So economists would say, if you want to burn money, you can go ahead and do it if it maximizes your utility. But this is something that only microeconomists would say, and macroeconomics, that is, uh, again, macroeconomics are people who correspond with the entire economy at large, talk about employment, GDP, labor, employment, that sort of stuff. They would probably beg to differ if you're burning money. But this holds true, and rationality assumptions would justify burning money. And yet, Homo sapiens would never do that, right? But there are different rationales for it. Okay, so economic rationality accepts that people want what they want without seeing whether those preferences are good or bad. And yet, when we're talking about classical economics, right, they do so we did game theory yesterday, and they calculate payoffs. And those payoffs are essentially a representation of the utility that you're deriving from it. So, irrespective of whether your preferences are good or bad, economics would see if it's maximizing your utility, that's a rational decision. Okay, that's why we also have distinctions between good good goods and bad goods. Okay, there are literally so alcohol or cigarettes, things that naturally harm your health are referred to as bad goods. Okay, and yet increasing the consumption of, let's say, alcohol for an alcoholic would maximize their utility. And so these are areas where there is gray space in the theory that exists, because your preferences, your choices are all subjective in nature. And even if, let's say, even in the same household, right, and I have a brother, so even in the same household, the decisions that I make that will be rational for me may or may not be rational for my brother. And that's based on the fact that we are subjective human beings who have different needs, wants, and choices. So, can there be one theory that can say that, okay, if you perform in this way, this is rational behavior. If you don't perform in that way, that's irrational behavior? That seems very problematic to me, because don't we lose our individual identities there? And aren't we forcing ourselves to be someone we're not because we're not subjective? Because we're not objective beings, we don't do calculations. And at least I don't. So I might as well argue for the fact that classical economic theory needs to provide space where you're understanding and acknowledging these drawbacks that humans have. This is where behavioral economics steps in. Okay. So you're questioning every assumption that exists in the classical economics. Okay, if I had to define behavioral economics, it is literally, in the first class we spoke about that decision theory itself is the intersection of mathematics, psychology, and economics. So is behavioral economics. And if I had to dissect behavioral economics in general, why is it called behavioral economics, is because it's focused more on the behavior part of it. Okay, so I was mentioning yesterday, if you see the history of economic thought, right, and how economic theories sort of have developed, it started off with political economy, full of philosophy. And Adam Smith was not just an economist; he was a moral philosopher first. Okay, and he's written about theory of sentiments and how we are moral beings and we interact. I don't remember the book, but I think one of his papers is definitely on theory of sentiments of moral beings, something of that sort. So Adam Smith was also a philosopher. He was a philosopher first and a political philosopher at that. And then that transcended into economics. And then there was a phase where uh, Paul Samuelson, Von Neumann, and Morgenstern, all of these people came in, Arrow and Debreu. This was the transition to mathematical economics. And now from 1870s, 1880s, so we'll be talking about Herbert Simon here. And Herbert Simon, Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman was actually a psychologist. He was an experimental psychologist by profession, and yet he's won a Nobel in economics. And that's because all of these fields are very, very, they're inherently interdisciplinary, because one cannot exist without the other. I'm not just an economic agent. I take my decisions within a context, whether that's a historical context, cultural context, the upbringing I've had, the scenario, the situation I'm in, whether it's a decision making under uncertainty or a decision making under risk. And all of these things, all of these caveats are something that classical economics couldn't address. It failed to address. And what started happening was that as people started researching more, the number of paradoxes and the number of caveats or exceptions that were being accepted as caveats to classical economics started increasing. And we discussed a lie paradox and Ellsberg paradox, and that sort of, okay, 1 second, yeah, and that's sort of again the beginning of it, right? That you're acknowledging the fact that we had classical theories, and yet the decision making or the interactions you're having are not abiding by those classical theories. Okay, So behavioral economics, it's essentially a direct correlation of cognitive biases, cognitive heuristics, your psychological reactions, your behavioral reactions, behavioral attributes, and how they correspond to economic decision making. Okay, whether that's decision making on a consumer level, just me and you taking decisions about what to buy, what not to buy, or it's on a bigger scale and investors are choosing between what stock to invest in and not to invest. And it has developed to such a state. So I was talking about nudge, right? And what nudge talks about is the fact that you can use and influence the fact that human beings have certain, restrictions. They're influenced by certain biases and heuristics, and we'll talk about that, so don't worry. And nudge theory suggests that you can use these findings, that there are certain restrictions to our cognitive and behavioral thinking, and you can use that to make better policies. And that puts behavioral economics on a government level. Okay. And at this point, so in the 21st century, there are governments that have actually enacted a behavioral insight team. President Obama has done it, and they had an entire team with the agenda that you have to incorporate more. Um, you have to acknowledge the fact that human beings have certain cognitive or behavioral biases, and we have to enact or curate policies in a manner that account for this and help people, nudge people to take better decisions. Okay. So President Obama has done it. There's an entire team of behavioral insights for the UK Parliament as well. The UK government has also done it. There's an entire team, it's called BEAST, I think behavioral in, I don't remember the name. But there's an entire team made by the Australian government also. So it's a behavioral insights and theoretics team, okay, for better policy making. So in the last 10 to 20 years, behavioral economics has it's it's transforming our understanding of economics, right? And you'll see people questioning these assumptions more and more. Okay, I hope everyone's like clear at this point. Just a yes or a thumbs up would do, and then I'll move on.
Yes.
Okay, great. So that's the background to behavioral economics, right? Now, as I begin to, so I've given you a brief overview of what behavioral economics is, right? Why is it actually becoming so transformative? And we can, if you guys are interested in actually looking at nudge theory or talking about it, how behavioral economics is impacting policy making, that is something we can definitely take up in next class if sufficient people are interested. Anyway, so bounded rationality. This becomes the first thing, and why is this the first thing? Is essentially because Herbert Simon started this. This is approximately 1950-53 onwards, and this is the first theory that came about that said that the rationality, the assumptions we've been working with, have certain restrictions to them. So this is the first theory, and I would probably account this as the sort of beginning to this entire idea and this entire field of behavioral economics. And so Herbert Simon started this off, and then from then on, it's only been an exponential ride of increasing. So I'll show you the website also of increasing number of biases and heuristics that have now been recognized, termed, and theorized. All right. So bounded rationality. Okay, what do you think when I say bounded rationality? What are the first ideas or interpretations that come into your mind? And I mean, a lot of information is already available on the slide, so it might be an easy guess. You can just unmute yourself and answer.
Can you repeat the question?
What do you think about bounded rationality? Like, what are your first thoughts when you hear the term?
I think maybe decisions that you make with specific with having specific preferences, you have certain boundaries to it.
Okay. Anyone else wants to develop on that?
When someone
Maybe,
makes a decision.
Sorry.
Oh, so she can go first.
thank you. I think it means like we can never be 100% rational with our choices.
Okay.
It's like limited.
Mm-hmm. Who? Oh, there was another person who was speaking.
I was going to say the same thing as her.
Okay, so let me ask you this: how do you think? Like, what are these limitations to our rationality?
Maybe like we never have 100% of the information.
Mm-hmm. And
Habits and like for example, if you're habituated to something, even if it's not the most rational option, you may end up like still continue to do that.
fair enough. Anything else?
Peer pressure, like sometimes you end up doing things because your peers are doing it, not necessarily because that's the most rational option.
Okay, great. Peer pressure, good one. What else?
Perhaps time.
Time,
When you're
great.
in a hurry, when you're in a hurry, you tend to make decisions without properly thinking.
Mm-hmm. Good one. Anyone else? Then I can move on. Any other ideas about what you think might limit our rationality?
The level that one thinks, for example, a child's rationality would be different from an adult.
That's fair, right? Because obviously a child has been exposed to less number of experiences, probably has limited cognitive abilities to make calculations. And I'm glad to get the answers because we did get answers for all the three constraints. So bounded rationality. Okay. Yeah. So bounded rationality states that decisions are often just good enough. So the decisions that humans end up taking are usually just good enough rather than optimized for maximizing your utility. And that merely happens due to the barriers that individuals face. And so the three essential barriers are the cognitive constraints that are there. Okay, so this is it could be with respect to just not being bothered with doing calculations for the payoffs that you might get. It can be related to the child or the adult example as well. The second thing is time constraints. Sometimes I just can't be bothered. If I so we had an example in which is um, if I want to buy a shoe, okay, and so in different scenarios I'll probably just go to the first shop I find and just buy the shoe. If I'm in the mall and my shoe is broken, okay, it's it's broken in the middle of while I'm like around the mall, and so I want to buy a new shoe. And maybe what I do is I don't have the time, so I just go to the first shop I see and buy it. Buy whatever first shoe I like. But then that probably isn't a rational decision because A, you've not looked at all the information that's there, you've not looked at other choices that you might have had. Okay, you've not thought about it essentially. And so the problem here is that you're constrained by time. Okay, you don't have the time, you can't be bothered to sit down, make calculations, take a decisions, take all the factors into account. And this is something that's very real, right? Happens to all of us. We take decisions in a hurry a lot of times. And the third thing is information constraints, which is what a lot of other people mentioned, and I've been talking about it a lot. Okay, do you have complete? So they say, when you're, let's say you're buying something on Amazon, right? And what some people might do, let's say if it's like a TV, okay, you want to buy a TV of Amazon. Something you'll do is, let's say you'll check what are the prices for different brands providing similar sorts of TVs. Maybe you'll check another platform. I might check Flipkart. All right, I'll also might check a retail outlet. What are the offline markets offering? But this is a very lengthy process, right? Do you often go to three different places and compare and contrast their prices? I don't think so, right? So often you don't have all the information that are required to take a decision at a point. This also corresponds to our discussions about decision making under risk and decision making under uncertainty. When you don't know what the outcomes might be, or you know what the outcomes might be, but the probability of those outcomes are unknown. And in that scenario, you don't have complete information. And yet, as human beings having an entire life, right, there are circumstances which do occur, which force you to take decisions in those scenarios. So, do you sit down and predict and forecast the future? I don't think so, right? You take decisions on the basis of the limited information you have. And so, why have I highlighted good enough? Why is bounded rationality an idea of taking decisions that are merely good enough? And that's because of the fact that we are convinced with good enough. Okay, if there are certain criteria that I want, okay, you know what? My criteria is that I'm hungry right now, and the only criteria I care about is that my hunger should be fulfilled. Okay, and probably an optimization function would be having the best quality food, the best taste, a tasty dish, something of that sort. But currently, even if I find something that's filling my stomach at this point, it's a good enough decision for me to make. I might not like the food, but if I'm completely famished, is that what I really care about? If you're in a desert, do you care about whether the water might is pure or something of that sort, or would you just choose water instead? And so these are trade-offs again, right? And what bounded rationality says is there are circumstances if you have certain criteria for a particular decision, and you can see that at least these criteria are being met, then you choose that decision and you don't put the extra effort. And the extra effort, or the extra effort with respect to your cognitive abilities, with respect to your effort to find more information, and the time cost, all of these are costs in economic language and in economic parlance. And so if you're also minimizing the cost that you're putting in for these decisions. You say, if I find a decision that's good enough, I'll take it, because we have limitations to our rationality. We can't, as homo sapiens, we don't qualify and we don't satisfy the assumptions that classical economic theory has. And which is why bounded rationality is sort of opening the gateways to behavioral economics, because this is the first theory that is saying that the entire idea of rationality is now being transformed to the idea that we have bounded rationality, and there are barriers and boundaries to our rationality, and these are the three. And these three are very important, in understanding bounded rationality is very important, because these three exactly intersect with the assumptions we had earlier, right? Economic agents, maximize utility, complete information, all of that stuff. I've been doing that since like the first class. And yet we're here again. And now we can challenge it. And now we have a theory that supports the fact that yes, there are caveats to classical economics, and this is it. Okay. So, what does bounded rationality say? The theory says that there are essentially, you can recognize two sorts of people. There are maximizers, and maximizers are people who actually abide by the principles of classical economics. So they behave in the traditional economic way, and they make use of the best, try to make the best possible choices from available alternatives. So these people within this scenario also work in the manner that classical economics is. And why is it important? So, bounded rationality creates this distinction between maximizers and satisficers. We'll talk about that also. And this distinction is important, and it's really smart of Herbert Simon to provide this distinction, because he's plugging his leaks. He's telling you that, okay, there are people who actually don't abide by the classical economic principles, aren't probably rational, and it might be 90% of the population, and yet you can and you possibly might find people, that the 10% of the population who do work as maximizers and who do abide by classical economic theories. And so by dividing his theory in this manner and recognizing that there are two different characteristics that can exist in agents, he's sort of plugging the leaks and making sure that his theory is it doesn't have any leaks. doesn't have any argumentations or criticisms. Okay, that's why bounded rationality has become the new accepted theory for rationality. But I mean, behavioral economics is also a theme that's not free from its critics, right? And we'll probably discuss about that later as well. So maximizers, they behave in the traditional economic way, and so the flip side becomes satisficers. And satisficers are essentially defined as people who just who examine a limited set of alternatives and choose between the best of them. But why is it called satisfices? It's sort of a play on the word satisfied, and satisfying the wants that you have. That this is the example where you talk about good enough. So my wants are just satisfied. They might not be maximized, but at least they're satisfied. So at least my hunger is gone. Whether I enjoy that food, whether it is maximizing my utility, is something I don't care about. I'm not bothered by. But at least my wants are satisfied. And so I am willing to choose between a limited set of alternatives and not being bothered about putting in the extra time, information, or cognitive abilities into it. All right. So these are the two main distinctions that bounded rationality acknowledges. Are there any questions for this? For anything we've discussed up till now?
No questions till now.
Okay. Cool then. That's cool if you all are understanding it. We have this short video. Can you hear audio? No, no.
People are classified into two categories, maximizers and satisficers, depending on how they experience pleasure. Maximizers try to squeeze the greatest amount of benefit out of every opportunity, whereas satisficers feel happy with the choices as long as they think they are good enough. If you're a maximizer, before buying an electronic gadget, you would search for a very long time looking at as many alternatives as possible, even that are not in the price range you're looking out for, because you have the fear of losing out on something better. Also, while listening to music on the radio, you often check other stations to see if something better is playing, even though you're satisfied with what you're presently listening to. If you are a satisficer, you won't look for more options and be happy with what you're listening to. Maximizers are always looking for the best alternative, and in this process, they miss out on important experiences, which in turn costs them happiness. Research has shown that maximizers are more regretful of purchases, less satisfied with life, more depressed, less satisfied with success, and less optimistic. Dan Gilbert, Harvard psychologist, and his team had college students rank their preference for 6 paintings and then allowed them to take what they rated third or fourth home. 15 days later, he asked them to re-rate the prints. This time, they rated the print they took home much higher. In another survey, Gilbert and his team let students take home one of their two favorite photographs. Students in Group 1 made their choice and took the photograph home. Students in Group 2 were allowed to change their minds and had several days to reverse the decision about which photo to keep. Students from the first group who were done with the decision tended to be far happier than the other group who were allowed to change their decision. What we notice here is that the brain naturally creates positive sentiments about a choice that is complete and can't be reversed. Another research shows how, with increased number of options over a certain limit, we have more negative emotions. Here are the steps you need to follow. Outline what you need.
We can stop that here. Okay, so it's an interesting video. Let's talk about what they show here. So this essential idea, the study that he's citing, okay, this idea is interesting because it talks about a concept known as information overload or choice overload, which is that the more number of choices you get, the more confused you are. And so the more unsure you are about whether you made the right decision or not. And because you're unsure about whether you made the right decision and you constantly question whether your choice was the best choice, or if maybe the other alternative was a bit better, no, but this has this problem, this has that problem. So it's a choice overload problem. And we can take that up also. So choice overload is again a sort of behavioral restriction or a behavioral attribute that has been recognized, and there are several case studies. This is one, but there are a lot of others, right, where you recognize that the more choices you get, the more difficult it is for people to take decisions. So if in, let's say, 15 choices, a person is making a decision, you're much less likely to be satisfied with that decision. And because you're much less likely to be satisfied by the decision, that is why he talks about the fact that you're much less happier about the decision you're making. It might depress you, all of that stuff. But So that's also interesting, but it was like a short video to just like summarize what we discussed about maximizes and satisfies. Okay, now I want to talk about heuristics and bias. So we've spoken about behavioral economics. The foundations of the origins of behavioral economics are is in bounded rationality. Okay, and then how has behavioral economics developed, right? So, I mean, there are obviously behavioral sort of caveats we've recognized, like choice overload, information overload, that sort of stuff. But the most important, the most prevalent usage and analysis of behavioral economics lies in understanding its heuristics and biases. So, heuristics is basically a fancy word for rule of thumbs or shortcuts, mental shortcuts that people use to make quick decisions. So, you know how we spoke about in bounded rationality, there are constraints about time and information. Heuristics plug that. They say that, okay, you have less time, so you're actually abiding by mental shortcuts. That, okay, this is how I'll take decisions in this scenario. And this is a rule of thumb that human beings have developed. And it'll be very surprising to see that a lot of these heuristics are common and prevalent across the population. So, which is why behavioral economics gets the weight it does, right? Suppose if their studies were only based in India, I'm from India, right? If we have people from other places as well. So if their studies were only based on analysis of human behavior in India, it won't be something that's generally recognized or universally recognized and have the sort of impact that it does. But it's because people have replicated these studies in different countries, and they've realized that human beings, despite the cultural or the historical background they've probably grown up in, they still have similarities in these biases. Probably the extent is different, probably a bit of context could be different, but the general foundation remains the same, which is why they're so widely accepted. And so heuristics are these mental shortcuts that you use, okay, because you're bounded by constraints. Okay, now I want to show you something. So I've added this link here, okay, decisionlabs.biases, and can everyone see the screen as well?
Ananya, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Um, yeah, I have to leave now. I'm really sorry because my school started from today, so I have a class in like 5 minutes, and I'm really sorry. I tried to like be present for.
Okay, no worries. See you later.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
Bye. Okay, yeah. Can everyone see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, now I want to show you something cool. So this is basically a list of um, all the recognized cognitive biases that are there. So cognitive is essentially corresponding to uh, your brain functioning, right? Cognitive abilities, right? So these are the most relevant biases in behavioral economics. And for a second, I just want to scroll through it. Okay, if you look, it's alphabetically ordered, and I'm like still scrolling. So all of these biases, I'm just at R. Wow. So all of these biases are now recognized in behavioral economics. And what they've done is like what I mean, I personally find a problem with this also, but what they've done is all the ambiguities or all the caveats that were there in classical economics now has a behavioral economic explanation for it. Okay, so if people are up for it, a fun thing to do would be choose any of these effects, and we can probably talk. So someone mentioned peer pressure, right? Um, and so peer pressure, behavioral economics would call it the bandwagon effect. And that's essentially that if you see other people do something and it becomes a popular opinion, then you hop on the bandwagon and you tend to follow it. And so another example or another sort of behavioral theory that corresponds, so we have bounded rationality here. See? Another theory that corresponds to this is herd behavior. Herd behavior. Can I not spot herd behavior? No. Huh. They don't have herd behavior here. Anyway, herd behavior is essentially, it's again correlates with herd mentality, or following the crowd. So if, let's say, you see a lot of, if you're in a group of 15 friends, right, and 5 to 7 of your friends start doing something, or they're taking a new class, so you have a tendency to follow that herd mentality, and you follow that herd behavior, so you're influenced by what people around you are doing. Okay, so that's another, and these are biases that behavioral economics has recognized and termed as. Okay, is there any other theory that you guys are like finding catchy, and we can probably discuss that? It's very cool to find an entire list of all the theories that are possibly there. No one? Anyone? It's like a spin the wheel, and we can just discuss if there's any theory that you find interesting. No one? No one wants to just choose a theory and discuss?
IKEA effect would be nice.
Okay, that's cool. I like it. So, what is IKEA? Okay, so whoever chose that, okay, what is IKEA known for?
Build
Building like, yeah, building
you make it
furniture.
easy.
Building your own furniture, right? So, IKEA effect essentially talks about, and this is also used to sort of explain and explain the success of IKEA. And what this says is that when you're building something, right, what IKEA does is you have to build your own furniture. So in the process of building that furniture, you're investing so much time and effort to it. And in that process, you get committed to it. You get committed to the fact that you have built it. And that's why you place a very high value on it. Which is why this is saying, why do we place a disproportionately high value on things we have helped create? Okay, and probably, so if you see, IKEA furniture and all is very simple. It's not very fancy and all, but the amount of effort you put in creating it and doing that DIY, do it yourself thing, it sort of attaches it to you. And when you place it in your living room, you're like, I made this, I love it. And probably if you buy it in $500, you'd want to sell it in $700, because you're accounting for the effort and the time and you know the love that you've put into creating that furniture. And that's essentially what the IKEA effect is. So that people tend to value things that they assemble themselves. And so IKEA effect can be used in sort of providing greater value to other things that require DIY. So there was this study, okay, back when, so probably everyone here has used cake mixes, right? Ready-made cake mixes. Yes, no. Okay, cool, thanks. So, cake mixes, when they first came out, okay, nobody was buying it because at that time it was just powder and you only had to like mix water or milk into it and then make it. And then bake it. So it was just that. It was that easy. And then people see that, cake mixes are not selling. And so what they do is they say, okay, add milk and eggs. Okay. So just a simple thing, add another egg. Um, and suddenly cake mixes are now selling. And that's because people started adding value to it. They were like, okay, this is easy, but also not very easy that I feel like it has no worth, or it's too easy to result in anything good. So actually, just adding eggs, and if I can find like an article that talks about this thing, but it's actually very cool. So you can search this up. History of cake mixes and how adding an egg changed it. So even though humans and the consumers had to do a little bit of extra effort because of the fact that they had to help create it or contribute a little to making the cake mix, they attached more value to it. They said, okay, at least this is like I have put in a bit of effort not too much effort that I have to spend an entire day baking, but also enough effort that I can be proud of the cake that comes out. And it's not just powder and water, because that sounds very questionable to me. So that's essentially what the Ikea effect is. And it can be translated into occurrence in different scenarios. Pretty cool, right? We can probably, okay, I'll just go back to it. But I'll send the link for this website on the group. And it's extremely, extremely interesting. So it's not just about reading. So see, we have choice overload also. Why do we have a hard time choosing when we have more options?
Uh,
So yeah.
Sorry. If you don't mind, can we discuss what's Google effect?
Okay, let's go ahead and do it. Why do we forget information that we just looked up? You know how sometimes it happens that you open your phone to see the time, and then suddenly you also forget the time that you saw. Like, I don't know, it happens to me. But it's basically, from what I understand from this, is it's basically this idea that because it's so easy to Google stuff, that our retention capacity has reduced. So we forget information that we've just looked up. But then again, you can probably go deeper into it, because I mean, this is also probably like 150, or maybe less biases that are stated. So Google effect is actually new for me as well. But I can send this. So it has everything, right? I love this website. So it has everything from examples to and why it's important, where it occurs, how it started. So this is a great resource, and I'll send the link in the group. But that's basically it. So we have a lot. So gambler's fallacies. Okay, 1 second. Framing effect. Yes. So let's discuss framing effect. Framing effect is something I have here. Okay. So now I need participation. Okay. This is the first shirt. Okay. You've gone shopping. It's a Sunday. You're like, okay, today I will shop. This is the first option you get. Buy this shirt for $290. Probably very, very, very expensive. I'm an Indian, okay, and I'm doing the conversion. But anyway, so this is a shirt for $290. Would you buy this, or there's a shirt that was $400 and is now $290? Which one are we choosing?
I would choose the one that's on sale.
So the 400 that's now 290.
Yes, provided that they are two different shirts. Or is it the same shirt?
I don't know. All you know is that this is the pricing. That's could be marginal differences in the type of shirt.
All right, then I'll stick with going like this, the one on sale.
Okay. Others?
I'll stick to the normal one with this initial price at 290.
Why would you stick to the normal one?
It's just an assumption. Like the one that's on sale, it has been decreased to an amount that is equal to the amount for an initial price of the same shirt, or I'm assuming that it's the same shirt, or if it's the different shirt, probably it had a higher value. It had that's why it had a higher price, so it's on a sale. I can prefer it like that. If it's a different shirt, I think I would go for a sale.
Okay. Others?
I think I'll go with the one that was originally $400 because supposedly it was originally worth more. So maybe I could resell the shirt for a higher price.
Yeah, I mean those things exist irrespective, right? Okay. Everyone else? What would you choose? Guys, you have to answer. Okay. So if I had to summarize it, um, some people have chosen the $400 and let's use the explanation that we gave about the fact that it's 400, it was $400 and now it's 290, so I might as well choose that, right? Because maybe it was worth more. And now this is the framing effect, in the sense that when you're doing this, right, that okay, it was 400 and now it's 290. Okay, so the framing effect and anchoring effect are both working simultaneously. Anchoring is that you anchored that the price, anchored is like how an anchor really is, like a ship's anchor. So you've anchored the price to to $400. So based on human perception, right? You have the producers here, the brand has sort of changed your perception in the sense that the shirt on the right that's now on sale was worth 400, but now I am selling it at 290, so it becomes a offer or it becomes a sale. And yet these shirts could might as well be identical, completely identical. And yet because they framed it in the manner that it's a 400 that's reducing to a 290, rather than just a 290 shirt. As human beings, we tend to perceive the shirt on the right that's reduced from 400 to 290 as being a better deal than just the 291, because we're attracted by these things. And because they've also used anchoring effect, which is that they've placed the worth at a 400. So a good way to understand anchoring effect is, if you guys have ever done bargaining, so you would probably start with, if let's say I was bargaining for a toy, okay, and the toy is worth like 100 rupees, but I know that I can probably get it in 50. So I would probably start with a 20, because and the shopkeeper. So you know how there are flea markets, etc., that are naturally meant for bargaining, or that for a fact that people charge high prices and you're supposed to bargain. You know, and there are markets like that around, like almost in all countries, or at least in most South Asian countries, at least. Okay, and so the shopkeeper will start at 200 and he'll probably be willing to go to 100. And you will probably start at a 20 and you'll probably be willing to go to a 70. So what happens is, when the shopkeeper starts from a 200 and let's say gets you convinced at a 150, you think that you've got a 50% a 50 rupee discount. And yet for the shopkeeper, he's still making a 50 rupee profit. So what is happening is he anchored it at a high price. And so this is anchoring as an effect occurs a lot in auctions and all. So they start higher. If you start lower, then you'll always compare it to the base price that you started off with. If I start bidding from 50 rupees and then I go up to 500, I'm like, okay, dude, this is like 10 times what I started off with. And yet, if I'm starting at 100 or 150, then the comparison is much less. And that 500 doesn't seem that far away. So, anchoring helps and it influences the biases that you have. Let's say I use an iPhone, okay? So then my prices have now been, my choices for buying a phone has now been anchored to the prices of a standard iPhone. And yet, let's say my brother loves Android, okay, and we have arguments about Apple and Android all the time. And for him, the prices are anchored at a much lower rate, because he's like, dude, you can buy an affordable phone that's working much better than an Apple at a lesser rate. So for him, if I say that, I bought an iPhone of this much, he'll probably be like, dude, I could have bought like three of the phones that I have, and they'll work better than the phone you've got. And that's because, and yet iPhone users seem to be the most loyal consumers. And that's because they've anchored the prices. All right, does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
So another way of understanding framing effects is, like another famous example is, would you choose something that says 5% fat or something that says 95% fat free?
95%.
95%.
Why? If it's 95% fat free, which means it has 5% fat, doesn't it?
If I was someone health conscious, I would go for 95.
No, but my question is, if you're buying something that has five, that says on the label that this contains 5% fat, and you have the same product, but the label now says this has this is 95% fat free.
I think the keywords that you use are, persuading you to look at it from a different perspective. Because when somebody is looking, to lose weight, and then you say on a label that it is 95% fat free, you know that it is a keyword of losing weight. So you know that you 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 are persuaded that yeah, it has less calories, so you'll not gain weight. So I think that mentality will automatically make you to choose the 95% fat free one.
Exactly, Shivani. And this mentality is the framing effect. And that this is why people term it as, this is why you see 999, so 499, 599. People perceive 499 to be less than 500, even though there's like a 1 rupee difference, and you end up paying that 1 rupee anyway. But because our perceptions, the way it's framed, impacts the decisions we make, that's why they keep it at 499. That's why they do a 400, slashing a 400 and making the shirt a 290. That's why rather than writing a 500% fat 500% fat content, they write 95% fat free content. Even though when you take a second and think about it, if it has 5% fat, that means it is 95% fat free. And if it is 95% fat free, then it has 5% fat. And yet, if I kept these two products side by side and I was told what to choose, and I didn't have time and I had to take a decision in a second, I will choose the 95% fat free one. So, no difference, only the framing effect. Because these are mental shortcuts that human beings use. And this is behavioral economics. That you're recognizing that these are shortcuts. A rational consumer, okay, maximizes, they would realize this, right? They'll like, hold on a second, 5% fat and 95% fat free is exactly the same thing. Then why am I choosing a different product? Just because of how it's framed, because it makes no sense. And behavioral economics enters here because you're recognizing that framing effects matter, and these are shortcuts that we all use. So it's universally accepted. You see 499 whether you're in India or in the United States. You see these things happening, 400 slash to or 290 happening everywhere. So the conclusion is that, I mean, I'll still stick to this term that I've like this statement that I've started using, which is that behavioral economics is meant to plug the leaks. And behavioral economics is not free from its own problems, right? Because our bias is always bad. Like the way they say it, they use cognitive, the way behavioral economics term it, they say cognitive biases and restrictions, or the fact that we are irrational, so we need biases. But then our bias is bad. If I'm using a mental shortcut, is does that make me stupid or bad? Isn't it also making our job easier? Okay, and so I've added this. It's a book, but there's also like an entire YouTube series. I don't think it's a YouTube series, but had a lot of YouTube videos on it. So Gerd Geiger is one of the critics of behavioral economics. As in, he's still a behavioral economist. He just questions the perception that is being built. And so behavioral economics has, in the sense that it's developing, it's saying heuristics and biases exist, and so human beings are irrational. But that's not true either, right? Because a lot of heuristics make us smarter. And so Gerd Geiger Renzer, he's also done a lot of research in behavioral economics, and he gives the idea of how, um, if you're playing a sport, so in India you play cricket a lot, right? And so if like the ball is coming, you have to catch the ball. Um, um, Physics and all would say that you're supposed to do the calculations for where the ball would land. Okay, entire vector theories, and then you're supposed to match it with the motion and how back you should go. And yet, what actually happens is that players match their eyesight. Okay, so I can if you guys are interested, I can send a video for uh, Gerd Geiger-Renzer also. And what he says is that biases make us smart, and these heuristics make us smart, right? Because I can't do calculations while I'm supposed to catch the ball. But we have developed heuristics and rules of thumbs about how you can analyze where the ball would land. And you're matching your eyesight with the ball. And your eyesight is moving with the ball. And that's how far behind you should go if you want to catch the ball. So, are there any problems with shortcuts? I mean, isn't it leading us to make good decisions in most cases? I mean, framing effects, anchoring effects, they're used a lot in marketing to influence the decisions, right? 95% fat free product sells more than a 5% fat product. But what is the harm? What is the cost of the harm that is incurring to us? Is it bad to have these shortcuts? Because again, we are human beings, right? So then if behavioral economics also starts terming the idea that okay, human beings are irrational and these are theories that explain all their irrationalities, but then you're still ending up calling us irrational. Are you accounting for other factors that do influence, right? And is there a problem with that there are social, psychological, and historical factors in context that influence our decision making? So that's essentially it. We'll cover more of behavioral economics. We'll dive deeper into prospect theory, probably loss aversion and risk aversion, which again is very big, talks about Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. So, but yeah, food for thought. So think about it. Is behavioral economics also the end all be all? I don't think so. That's about it, guys. If there are any questions, you can let me know. Otherwise, we've overshot our time.
I just have one question. So now that we've seen this, it's like a greenwashing and pinkwashing that happens in industries, right? Is it part of the framing effect? Like you deceive the customers of what is happening, but it is actually not.
Can you repeat greenwashing and pinkwashing? Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Can you repeat your question? Did you say greenwashing and pinkwashing, as in environmental greenwashing and pinkwashing for feminine products?
Yeah, like a and it's like framing your thinking that this is what is happening, but actually it is not. So you imagine and you start to invest in that company, but actually it is not giving you any benefit. So is it part of behavioral economics, like deceives you and it makes you think that this is what is happening?
Yeah, I mean, color coding does impact your perception of it, right? That's why they color code certain things. So if I don't know if the theories like the heuristics and all that we spoke about, or I am personally aware of, whether that fits in. But the way it's termed, right? Because again, look at it this way: when you've color coded something, you've actually set the perception that okay, if things are like completely in green, it's probably environmental. Or the perceptions become that if things are very pink, then it might relate to feminine products. So it is again impacting the perception that we are having about those products. So then might be again we went through so like I scrolled through so many theories and biases and effects. So there might be something that does correspond to it, right? Because it becomes about perception. So there's definitely a behavioral or a psychological aspect that is attached to it. Okay. Anyone else? All right, guys, if you have no questions, you can leave and we will see you next Saturday.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye, Gia. Are you there? Wait, I should stop.